We're talking about the top waiver wire options for Week 8 next on Fantasy Football Today in 5. Welcome to FFT in 5. I'm Chris Towers, and I'm here by myself to get you ready for the Week 8 waiver wire. Obviously, make sure you listen to the full episode of Fantasy Football Today on your podcast feeds for a full breakdown of the top options for Week 8. But first, let's talk about that 49ers Vikings game where the Vikings surprisingly upset the 49ers here, 22-17. And I think the biggest takeaway from this game is just, hey, Christian McCaffrey played and he looked pretty good. He did Christian McCaffrey things, 96 total yards, 2 touchdowns, only 3 catches, only 15 carries, but it wasn't a game where the 49ers played a ton of snaps. The Vikings had the ball a little more often, so doesn't really seem like there was anything limiting him with that oblique injury. Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason, who we spent all that fab money on last week, combined for 1 carry for a -1 yard. So, yeah, no limitations there with Christian McCaffrey with his oblique injury. And as long as he doesn't suffer any setbacks, which is always possible with obliques, I want to stress, but as long as he doesn't suffer any setbacks, he's going to be good to go. He's the number 1 running back in fantasy football. He should be the number 1 running back in fantasy football moving forward. And I think if we were redrafting, he might be the number 1 pick in all fantasy leagues for the rest of the season. So no concerns there. There were a couple of scares on the Vikings side as far as the injury front goes. TJ Hawkinson had a couple of scares with an ankle injury, but he played through it. Jordan Mason also left the game. It was a little scary late. He grabbed at his foot. Turns out it was just cramping. So he was all good. He came back in the game. TJ Hawkinson played through that ankle injury. No concerns there, and they both had great games. They stepped up. This is what we were hoping to see when Justin Jefferson went down. TJ Hawkinson, 11 catches on 12 targets for 86 yards, but Jordan Addison's the real headline here. 7 catches, 124 yards, 2 touchdowns on 10 targets. One of those touchdowns was just a bonkers play where he just outmuscled the 49ers defensive back. 49ers defensive back, Ward, stepped in front of the pass, looked like he had an interception, and Jordan Addison just took it from him and ran the rest of the way for the touchdown. It was a rare kind of play from a guy that we hope was a rare talent, and he's starting to show that he can be that kind of guy. He's making plays down the field. He's garnering a solid target share. It was about 22%, 23% today. Not quite alpha number 1 wide receiver type numbers, but that'll play as long as Justin Jefferson's out. And when Jefferson's back, I still think Jordan Addison can be a fringe wide receiver too. So very good performance from him and what we wanted to see with him stepping up with Jefferson out. Let's move on to the Week 8 waiver wire options. I talked to Jamie Eisenberg earlier. He gave me his top 5 for this week, and him and I are in agreement on who the top option on the waiver wire this week should be. At least for me, it's if you need a running back. It's Darrell Henderson. And look, you probably need a running back. Who doesn't need a running back? Even with every team playing in Week 8. No buys this week. That's nice. But even with every team playing, there's a decent chance you still need some running back help. And Darrell Henderson is about 50% rostered right now in CBS fantasy leagues. And he had 61% of the Rams running back touches on Sunday. He got the ball actually on all 3 of their green zone touches. That's plays inside of the 10-yard line of the opposing team. So they made him a real focal point there, and that was a great sign for his chances. He played more passing snaps than Royce Freeman, who should have a role. So the scary thing with Henderson, and I mentioned this on yesterday's podcast, I believe, is he's not actually on the roster right now. He's on the practice squad. So there is a chance that some other team signs him to their active roster, or the Rams just decide they don't want to play the roster games with him. They got the 1 week out of him. They let him go. I think that's really unlikely, though, given how they just threw him out there for 50% of the snaps and the lead running back role. I think he's going to be the lead back moving forward with Kyren Williams out, at least for the next 2 games. They'll have to make a decision on whether to add him to the active roster at that point, and Williams will be 1 game away potentially. So, there's a short-term thing with Henderson here, but if you need a running back for the next couple of weeks, he's absolutely the top option. If you don't need a running back, there are some really good pass catchers, especially young rookies. Dalton Kincaid, tight end for the Buffalo Bills, had 8 catches last week, starting to come into his own. Hopefully, it's only 1 week, but Dawson Knox suffered a wrist injury that's going to require surgery, so Dalton Kincaid could be about to take off as a top 12 tight end moving forward. The other 2, Jackson Smith and Jigba for the Seattle Seahawks, had the breakout game we were hoping for with DK Metcalf out in Week 7, but even in Week 6, he saw his route share jump up to 81%. Still wasn't seeing a lot of downfield work, but he got that in week 7, so I think that was a good sign. And then Josh Downs for the Indianapolis Colts. I think he's going to benefit from Gardner Minshew being the quarterback. We've seen that the last couple of weeks. Big numbers there. Broke a big play this week. That was really nice to see because he was someone who looks more like a, possession move the chains kind of slot guy, which is great in PPR. But in what we've seen, with him breaking that big play on Sunday was maybe there's a little more upside here. So that's a really good sign. This is going to be a fast-paced, high-volume offense with the Indianapolis Colts. So I do think there's a chance for Josh Downs to be a solid wide receiver 3 moving forward for fantasy. Someone who is rostered in under 50% of CBS fantasy leagues right now. That's going to do it for FFT and 5. Again, make sure you listen to the full episode of Fantasy Football today on your podcast feeds for an in-depth breakdown of the waiver wire. Make sure you check out Jamie Eisenberg's full waiver wire breakdown column on cbssports.com/fantasy, and we'll see you tomorrow.